Welcome to the deep dive. It's funny. For centuries, being thin often meant you were poor, right? And being, well, larger was a sign you were doing well. But now, especially here in the 21st century, in places like Mexico, the US, UK, Australia, Canada, it feels like that's completely flipped. It seems the wealthier you are, the thinner you might be, and obesity has become, tragically, really a mark of poverty. So today, our mission is to try and unpack this, to uncover what feels like a carefully set trap by these huge global food companies, a trap that affects pretty much every ordinary person who is not wealthy. That's, you and me included. We're going deep on this, using insights from a really interesting YouTube video, research from places like Harvard Med School, Oxford, books like Michael Moss's Salt, Sugar, Fat, and also dig into the science of sugar metabolism and addiction. And the numbers right off the bat are pretty stark, like 2023 data. U.S. adult obesity, over 41.9%, and it's even higher for Black adults, 49.9%, Latino adults, 45.6%. And interestingly, rural areas actually have higher rates than cities or suburbs. And if you look at the states with the lowest incomes, Arkansas, Mississippi, West Virginia, they consistently have the highest obesity rates. And get this, poorer Americans have a 70% higher chance of getting diabetes, 19% higher hypertension. These things used to be called diseases of the rich. Now they're really diseases of the poor. No. So what is going on here? What's driving this really unsettling shift?
Yeah, what's fascinating is seeing how those economic limits directly shape what people eat. And that leads to these, paradoxical health results. It really suggests, that getting affordable, genuinely nutritious food is a massive challenge for a lot of people. Think about that American reality show, My 600-Pound Life. Started back in 2012. It follows people who are morbidly obese, often over 270 kilos, trying to get healthier. But despite, 12 seasons now? And tragically, 13 participants have died. U.S. obesity rates just kept climbing. And even back in 2018, people online were asking, why are the people on this show so often? Well,
That's a really powerful point. And you see it in the individual stories, don't you? Like Dottie from season 4. She struggled with weight since she was a kid, over 300 pounds at 18. Then her weight ballooned to 500 pounds. Stress from a failed marriage, caring for her son who had hydrocephalus, and her current husband, his income was so low, they could basically only afford ultra-processed fast food. Fried chicken, fries, burgers, pizza. Her story, is heartbreaking, but it really feels like a snapshot of what so many low-income families face, just like the data shows.
Exactly. It's not just anecdotes. There was a 2012 study, Harvard Med School and Oxford, found that one-third of homeless people in the U.S. are overweight, which is surprising, right? And then look at SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, helps about 44 million low-income people every month. But the data shows over half the benefits get spent on things like meat, sugary drinks, pre-made meals, cheap desserts, cheesy snacks, candy, sugar. Only about 24%, just under a quarter, goes towards fruits, vegetables, grains, nuts, beans, seeds, spices. It really shows how, even with help, the available choices, or maybe the perceived affordable choices, often lead down a less healthy path.
That's really telling. So it begs the question, how did we get here? When did sugar, this thing we all kind of love, become so everywhere? What's its hidden story?
Well, its journey is ancient, really. Sugarcane itself was domesticated way back, maybe 8,000 BCE in New Guinea. But originally, it wasn't really for people. It was mostly used for livestock feed because it was hard to transport and honestly just too tough to chew.
Right. So how did it go from animal feed to something we crave globally?
The big leap was around 500 BCE. People in India figured out how to actually produce sugar from the cane, make it into crystals. And that innovation meant it could be stored, it could be transported. And that just opened the door for it to go global. It basically ended our total reliance on just honey and fruit for sweetness. Big change.
And then when Arab traders brought it to Europe, the elite just went crazy for it.
Yeah, absolutely. It was super rare, super expensive because the production wasn't, industrialized yet. So it instantly became a symbol of power, of status. You hear these stories like 16th century English nobles being kind of proud of their rotten black teeth from sugar, Queen Elizabeth I apparently, and commoners who couldn't afford it would sometimes blacken their own teeth just to look wealthy.
Wow, that's dedication.
And then, after Columbus, the Americas became the big sugar production center for Europe. The climate was just right, but that huge demand for labor, well, that's what led to the horrific forced migration of enslaved Africans across the Atlantic, brought over by the Spanish initially for those sugarcane plantations.
Such a dark side to something so sweet. And production just kept ramping up.
It did. By the 18th century, the Industrial Revolution starts kicking in, bringing early machines to American plantations. Sugar output just soared. And by the mid-19th century, it finally became affordable enough for ordinary households. Plantation owners kind of stopped bragging about it being a luxury. It had already changed eating habits everywhere. There's this story in the novel by Lu Yuan. A character tastes rock sugar for the first time, and he's just overwhelmed, like physically trembling, starts crying, says he'll buy a whole bag when he gets money. It just captures that instinctive human craving for sweetness.
Yeah, that deep-seated craving.
Exactly, and that craving was about to be exploited like never before. Which brings us to a really key moment in the 1970s. Things really shifted around 1971. Nixon was president, food prices were sky high, he wanted re-election. He appoints Earl Butz as Secretary of Agriculture. And Butz pushes this policy, get big or get out. Basically, industrialize American farming. Lower food prices, but also use grain as a diplomatic weapon.
Right, and this huge industrialization was pushed forward by those big four global grain companies, wasn't it? ADM, Bunge, Cargill, Louis Dreyfus.
Absolutely. With government support, they just swallowed up small farms, boosted efficiency like crazy. Their influence became immense. I mean, one source said, as long as you are alive, no matter where you are, you cannot escape the control of the four major global food giants. A bit dramatic, maybe, but it makes the point.
Okay, so agriculture gets super efficient.
And by the mid-70s, the U.S. is drowning in corn. A massive surplus, just mountains of it, rotting. They exported some cheap, used a lot for animal feed, even made ethanol, but still, way too much corn. They needed a solution.
And the solution was high-fructose corn syrup. How does that fix a corn problem?
Exactly. A Japanese scientist over at Tsukuba University figures out the tech to mass-produce this stuff, high-fructose corn syrup, HFCS, from genetically modified corn. It uses enzymes to change some of the corn's glucose into fructose. The U.S. jumped on this tech. Suddenly, that useless corn surplus became a super profitable sweetener.
And why was it so appealing to food companies? Just the price.
Price was huge. HFCS was sweeter than regular cane sugar, but crucially, it was half the price because they were using all that cheap surplus corn. And because it was so cheap, it just quietly seeped into almost everything. Processed foods, drinks. Plus, it extended shelf life from days to months, sometimes even years.
Wow, so it's just everywhere.
Oh, yeah. Think about a basic hamburger meal. The bun, corn syrup, the beef, from corn-fed cows, the fries, cooked in corn oil, ketchup. Corn syrup, again, it's kind of hidden in plain sight.
And Coca-Cola really led the charge on this, didn't they? Like a test case.
They did. In '74, they started slipping HFCS into their non-cola drinks. Nobody noticed, no complaints about taste. Then they swapped out half the sugar in actual Coke. And by 1985, all their U.S. drinks were 100% HFCS. That really opened the floodgates. The whole industry followed. And the amount of sugar, specifically this type of sugar in our diets, just exploded.
Okay, so we've got this cheap, super sweet syrup flooding the food system. But what does it actually do to our bodies? I mean, is sugar just sugar, or does this specific type matter?
It matters a lot. Not all sugars are treated the same way by your body, and the type plus how much you eat makes a huge difference. Food companies love sugar, not just for taste, but because it's addictive, and this is key. It doesn't really make you feel full.
Really? I always just thought, sugar is sugar. Can you break down the main differences for us?
Sure. So sugars are carbs, right? You've got simple ones, monosaccharides like glucose and fructose. Then disaccharides, two linked together like sucrose, that's table sugar, half glucose, half fructose. And then long chains, polysaccharides like starch, which is basically chains of glucose. Now, glucose and fructose, even though they're both simple sugars, your body handles them very differently.
Okay, let's start with glucose. What's its job?
Glucose is basically the body's main fuel. Brain, muscles, cells, they run on glucose. When you eat glucose, like from starches, rice, whatever, it gets into your blood sugar goes up. That signals your pancreas to release insulin. Insulin is like the traffic cop. It tells cells, okay, use this glucose for energy or store it for later as glycogen in your liver and muscles. Now, here's the thing. If those storage tanks are full, insulin says, okay, extra glucose, go to the fat cells. That leads to weight gain. But, with a reasonable amount, glucose itself isn't the direct cause of obesity.
Okay, so glucose isn't inherently evil. What about fructose then? That's the main player in HFCS, right?
Fructose is, it's a different beast. Our bodies don't really need it in large amounts, and we're not well equipped to process it efficiently. Unlike glucose, which pretty much all cells can use, fructose is mostly handled by the liver. And here's another huge difference. Fructose doesn't really trigger much insulin release. So the liver's working overtime, it converts a little bit to glucose, fine. but the vast majority, it gets channeled straight into making fat, specifically triglycerides.
Wow. So the sugar in all these processed foods isn't just empty calories, it's actively telling our body to make fat and not telling us we're full. What are the health impacts of constantly producing all this fat from fructose?
The impacts are pretty serious. All that fat building up in liver cells. That can lead straight to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Plus, the excess fat spills out into the bloodstream, travels around, builds up around your organs, that's visceral fat, and ups your risk for heart disease. Fructose can also contribute to things like gout. And long term, lots of fructose causes inflammation, oxidative stress. It makes your body less sensitive to insulin, increasing the risk of type 2 diabetes. But maybe most importantly for weight gain, glucose helps suppress ghrelin. That's the hunger hormone. It tells your brain you're full. Fructose, it does basically nothing to ghrelin. That's why you can drink a huge sugary soda and still feel hungry, or eat a whole bag of sweets and not feel satisfied. Your brain isn't getting this stop eating signal.
That explains so much, that feeling after certain snacks. But hold on, what about fruit? Fruit has fructose. Should we be scared of apples and bananas?
No, definitely not. Fruit has way less fructose than, say, a soda or processed snack. Plus, fruit comes packaged with fiber. Fiber slows down how quickly your gut absorbs the fructose, takes the pressure off your liver, and it actually helps you feel full. The real problem isn't the fructose in an orange, it's the sheer volume and concentration of fructose, mostly from HFCS, pumped into processed foods. Just for perspective, table sugar, sucrose, is 50-50 glucose-fructose. Common HFCS, the HFCS 55, is about 55% fructose. It's not a huge difference in ratio, but the price of HFCS is so low it encourages companies to just use tons of it.
Okay, it's becoming much clearer. The type and amount really do matter. So if dumping in loads of HFCS means more fat and no fullness signal, why do manufacturers do it? Beyond just cost, what's the end game?
The end game, many argue, is addiction, making consumers hooked. Now, there's some academic debate, but the evidence that sugar is addictive seems pretty strong, widely accepted even. There was a 2007 study, University of Bordeaux gave rats a choice, sugar water or cocaine. After 15 days, 94% chose the sugar water. In a 2017 paper, U.S. Heart Research Institute flat out concluded sugar is more addictive than cocaine and is basically destroying human health.
Whoa, more addictive than cocaine. That's intense. How does that work in the brain?
Well, when you eat sugar, it triggers your brain to release chemicals like serotonin and dopamine. These make you feel good, create a sense of reward. Your brain basically learns, hey, sugar equals pleasure, and it encourages you to seek it out again. It's why stress-eating sweets feels temporarily good. Your brain is shouting, yes, more of that feeling.
That really clicks. I've heard about people doing sugar detoxes, and it sounds brutal. Like Ariel's story. She tried 30 days, sugar-free, said the first week was worse than death, full of anger, dreaming about brownies. Then, day 7, she's at the movies, her friend's eating gummy bears, and she literally couldn't focus on the film, just stared at the candy. She did lose weight, like 3 inches off her waist and hips. But day 31, straight back to binging cookies, chocolate, felt reborn. It just shows that pull.
It really does, and it raises this important question, how is this constant exposure rewiring our brains? And beyond addiction leading to obesity and all the related diseases, there's research suggesting sugar might even cause lasting brain damage. They did this mouse study, water maze. Normal mice found the safe spot in like 5 seconds. Mice fed a high sugar diet long-term took them over 36 seconds. Big difference in cognitive function.
That's genuinely alarming. So, okay, if sugar, especially this HFCS stuff, is so bad for us, addictive, messes with hunger, potentially harms our brains, why aren't regulators stepping in? Why isn't something being done about it being added to seemingly everything? It feels like, as one source said, a war of capital without smoke. You walk into a store, trying to find food without added sugar is incredibly hard. It's not just the obvious stuff, it's in chips, noodles, sauces.
Well, this whole manipulation by corporations, it has deep roots. It really ramped up back in the 50s. 1955, President Eisenhower has a heart attack. Big news. And heart disease rates generally were soaring in the U.S. Scientists started looking for causes. At the same time, sugar consumption had already climbed dramatically. Back in the 1930s, Americans were eating about 90 pounds, like 40 kilos of sugar per person per year. Compare that to the WHO recommending ideally less than 9 kilos. We were already way over. So naturally, some scientists started pointing fingers at sugar.
And the big food companies, Kraft, Nestle, Pepsi, Coke, Mars, who all had a huge stake in sugar, they weren't just going to sit back, right? Yeah. They formed that Sugar Research Foundation, now the Sugar Association, way back in the 40s. What was their move?
Their move in the 1960s was pretty calculated. They paid scientists, including big names like Frederick Stare from Harvard's nutrition department and Hegsted, another Harvard guy who later worked for the government at USDA, to publish research that basically let sugar off the hook. These papers downplayed any link between sugar and heart disease and instead pointed the finger squarely at saturated fat. They even published a highly influential review in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1967, basically saying sugar's role was minimal, fat was the real villain.
And this is where Ansel Keys fits in, the nutritionist. His work on fat and heart disease gets talked about a lot, sometimes misrepresented, right? What was the key outcome back then?
Yes, Ansel Keys did major work in the late 50s looking at fat intake and heart disease across countries. There's definitely been debate and, frankly, misinformation about his methods later on. But the crucial result at the time was that the focus shifted away from sugar. Even Keyes' own big 22-country study showed a statistically significant link between fat intake and heart disease. But, and this is vital, correlation doesn't equal causation, right? Just because two things trend together doesn't mean one causes the other. Like, more ice cream sales correlate with more drownings, but ice cream doesn't cause drowning. Hot weather likely causes both.
Right, okay. So the debate about saturated fat continues even now. But what about trans fats? Those seem pretty universally accepted as bad news, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely undeniable. Industrial trans fats, the partially hydrogenated oils, they're made through a specific process. Food companies love them because they're cheap, they give great texture, think really crispy fries, smooth coffee creamer, and they make products last forever on the shelf. But health-wise, they're terrible. They raise your bad LDL cholesterol, lower your good HDL, and directly increase your risk of clogged arteries, heart attacks. You find them in tons of ultra-processed stuff. Fries, chips, pastries, cookies, margarine, that creamer, bubble tea.
So it's just this constant shell game. By 2000, sugar intake in the U.S. hits a peak, over 110 pounds per person. But when people followed the official low-fat advice and kept getting fatter, the industry, with government support, shifted blame again. This time to just calories, that whole calories in, calories out mantra. They even started suggesting sugar was healthier than fat because it has fewer calories per gram. Just brilliant deflection.
But the counter-narrative started building. 2009, Dr. Robert Lustig, a pediatric endocrinologist, gives this huge lecture, Sugar, the Bitter Truth. He compared fructose metabolism to alcohol metabolism in the liver, famously calling fructose alcohol without the buzz. His point was, you wouldn't give a kid beer, but we give them soda, and metabolically in the liver, it can be disturbingly similar.
Wow. And then Michael Moss's book in 2013, Salt, Sugar, Fat, exposed more. He talked about that Frito-Lay scientist who found kids are the biggest consumers of these intense flavors, and that their love for sugar wasn't necessarily innate, but an acquired behavior learned from all these processed foods. Like our tastes are literally being engineered.
Exactly. And then Damon Gameau's 2014 film, That Sugar Film, great experiment. He had 42 teaspoons of sugar, about 160 grams every day for 60 days. But crucially, his total calorie intake stayed the same, around 2,300 calories. The result, gained 17 pounds, 7% body fat, 10 centimeters on his waist. His liver enzymes went nuts, triglycerides shot up into the danger zone. It was powerful proof that where your calories come from matters hugely and not just how many.
And the smoking gun, the proof of the deliberate manipulation, finally came out in 2016, right?
Yes. Christine Kearns, a researcher at UC San Francisco, found documents hidden away in the Harvard Library. They showed the Sugar Association had paid those scientists, like Hegsted, the equivalent of nearly $50,000 in today's money, specifically to shape public opinion and downplay sugar's risks. The truth was finally out there.
Unbelievable.
But the sad part is, it might be too late in a way. Sugar is just so deeply embedded now. Those UC San Francisco scientists estimate that high-calorie sweet foods are indirectly responsible for maybe 35 million deaths a year globally from diet-related diseases, heart disease, diabetes, cancer. Though, on a slightly more positive note, by 2023, over 100 countries had brought in sugar taxes on drinks, trying to push back a bit. But this whole story just shows the incredible power industry has to shape science, shape policy, shape what we think is healthy, all to protect profits.
It's staggering. And with all that power, how do they make sure we keep buying this stuff, even when we might know better? That's the bliss point, isn't it?
That's the term, yeah. Michael Moss talks about it in his book. An experiment gave people mixtures, milk, oil, sugar. Too much sugar actually made it less enjoyable, but more fat. People never disliked more fat. But the perfect mix of sugar and fat, that created unprecedented pleasure. Add salt into that equation. Even more powerful.
So it's not an accident these snacks are so addictive, it's engineered.
Very much so. A market researcher, Howard Moskowitz, he coined the term bliss point. That perfect balance. Sweet, salty, rich. He found hitting that spot triggers our body's own natural feel-good chemicals, makes the food irresistible. It's why it's so hard to eat just one chip, right? Or one cookie.
Totally. So the success of things like Coke, Doritos, Ritz crackers, it's down to these complex formulas designed specifically to hit that bliss point. Moss calls it how the food industry manipulates us. Okay, so let's tie this all together. How does this create that trap we talked about at the start?
Well, it forms this kind of vicious cycle, doesn't it? Ultra-processed foods, high sugar, high salt, high trans fats, they're super cheap to make, last forever on the shelves, so they're cheap for consumers too. They naturally become the main source of calories for families on tight budgets. And that explains the flip we talked about. Why wealthier people now tend to be thinner, and obesity has become, grimly, a privilege of the poor. But then the cycle gets worse. The obesity and the diseases that follow diabetes, heart disease, they generate huge profits for other industries. Healthcare, pharmaceuticals, it creates this really disturbing loop where one source used a pretty dark metaphor saying poor people seem to be like leeks, basically being harvested at every stage, from eating to getting sick to dying.
That is, yeah, a really sobering picture. But maybe here's a thought to leave everyone with. Poison is only poison without dosage. No single food is inherently evil if you don't overdo it. And while these powerful forces definitely shape what's easily available and what we crave through all this sugar and fat, ultimately, we still have the right to choose. So maybe next time you're in the supermarket, just remember this deep dive. Think about what's really in that package. Maybe it helps make a slightly more informed choice about what you eat, and importantly, how much.